Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight we're diving into something that's going to completely reshape the way you think about Roman engineering, because spoiler alert, the Romans didn't just build roads and colosseums and conquer half the world. They figured out how to make water do exactly what they wanted it to do, when they wanted it to do it, in some of the most ingenious ways you've ever heard of. We're talking about the invisible masterpiece of Roman architecture, the plumbing systems hidden beneath the stone floors and behind the walls of a noble villa. A system so complex, so brilliantly designed, that honestly, some of it still works today, nearly 2,000 years later. Think about that for a second. We've got modern materials, plastic pipes, electric pumps, computers controlling water pressure, and yet Roman plumbing from the 1st century AD is still functioning. Before you settle in, smash that like button if you appreciate ancient engineering that actually works, and please, subscribe if you want to keep exploring the incredible hidden stories of history. Drop a comment and let me know. What's the oldest thing in your house that still works? I'm genuinely curious. Now dim the lights. Maybe pour yourself a drink. And imagine walking through the cool stone corridors of a Roman villa. The kind owned by some incredibly wealthy patrician who had access to the best architects and engineers money could buy. We're going to uncover exactly how they made those fountains flow, those baths steaming hot, and how they managed waste in a way that wouldn't horrify a modern sanitation engineer. Let's step into the world of Roman plumbing and see what these ancient geniuses figured out. When you think of a Roman noble's villa, you probably picture marble columns, frescoed walls, elaborate mosaics, and servants rushing around with wine and grapes. But what you might not picture is the absolutely staggering infrastructure underneath all that luxury, the water systems that made everything else possible. A Roman villa wasn't just a place to live. It was a statement of power, intelligence, and engineering prowess. And central to all of that was water. Lots of it, moving exactly where it needed to go, exactly when it needed to be there. The Romans understood something that seems obvious in hindsight, but was actually revolutionary at the time. Water equals power, not just politically, but literally. Control the water, and you control everything from your personal hygiene to your heating system to your decorative fountains that impressed your guests. A typical noble's villa might have anywhere from 50 to 300 rooms, sprawling gardens, multiple bathhouses, kitchens, latrines, ornamental pools. All of it demanded water. Lots of water. And not just any water. Clean water flowing reliably, whether it was summer or winter, drought or flood. That's where the architect came in. The Roman architect designing a villa's plumbing system wasn't just some guy with a ruler and a vague idea about pipes. He was part engineer, part mathematician, part philosopher. He had to understand gravity, pressure, flow rates, materials, durability, and the aesthetic principles that would make sure the water didn't just work, but looked magnificent doing it. The architect had to solve problems that would make modern engineers sweat. How do you get water from a source that might be miles away? How do you maintain consistent pressure? How do you prevent sediment and algae from clogging the system? How do you incorporate hot water when you don't have electricity or gas? How do you make sure the whole thing lasts centuries? These weren't academic questions. These were survival questions. A villa without reliable water would be uninhabitable, a failure of engineering, and a humiliation to its owner. So Roman architects took this very seriously indeed. If you've ever wondered where the water actually came from to fill a Roman villa's baths and fountains, the answer is almost always the same: an aqueduct. Now, most people think of aqueducts as those massive stone bridges you see pictures of, towering over the countryside like ancient monuments to Roman arrogance. And yeah, those dramatic arched structures did exist, especially the famous ones like the Pont du Gard in France. But the truth is, most of the aqueduct system was actually underground, hidden from view. A network of channels and pipes that stretched for miles, bringing water from distant mountains or springs down to the villa, sometimes traveling 8, 10, even 15 miles to reach a single estate. The architect's job started at the source, choosing where to tap into the water supply, figuring out what direction gravity would work in his favor, calculating the slope and distance. And this wasn't some casual decision. An error here could mean the water never arrives, or arrives too slowly, or arrives at completely the wrong temperature or quality. An aqueduct works because of one fundamental principle that the Romans completely understood: gravity. Water wants to flow downhill, always. So the architect's job was to set up a gentle, consistent downward slope from the source to the villa, usually anywhere from 0.5% to 2% gradient. We're talking incredibly shallow slopes over vast distances, but they add up. Not too steep, because then the water moves too fast and causes erosion and pressure spikes, and you can get cavitation in the pipes. Not too shallow, because then sediment settles and everything clogs up, and you'd need constant maintenance teams. It's this sweet spot that requires calculation and experience, understanding not just mathematics, but how water actually behaves under different conditions. The architect would have walked the entire route multiple times, checking elevations, marking where adjustments might be needed. Once the architect figured out his slope, he had to decide what the aqueduct should be made from. For the underground portions, often it was stone or brick channeling, built almost like a tunnel or a covered trench. The channels had to be carefully lined, so water didn't seep away into the surrounding earth or pick up too many minerals and debris. Sometimes they used concrete, that incredible Roman mixture that actually gets harder over time. For the longer distances, they might use lead pipes. Yes, lead. Before anyone knew about lead poisoning, the Romans thought lead was wonderful. It's durable, it can be shaped, it doesn't rust, and it moves water really efficiently. The architect had to figure out pipe diameters too, because water flow depends on how wide the channel or pipe is. Too narrow, and you've got backup and pressure issues. Too wide, and the water moves too slowly, settles, gets stagnant and gross. So you're calculating volumes, distances, elevation changes, all in your head or with basic measuring tools and geometry, all while trying to make sure your design is beautiful and efficient. The water traveling through these channels would gradually descend toward the villa, sometimes spending weeks moving through underground passages, other times exposed to the open air in certain sections. The architect had to account for evaporation, temperature changes, seasonal variations. In summer, water levels dropped. In winter, freezing could crack stone channels and crack pipes. Everything had to be built to withstand both scarcity and excess. By the time the water actually arrived at the villa, it had been filtered somewhat by traveling through soil and stone, though it still contained mineral and sediment. The architect knew this, so he built settling basins at key points, places where the water could slow down and heavier debris could drop to the bottom before continuing onward. It was low-tech water treatment, but it actually worked remarkably well. Now here's where Roman villa plumbing gets really sophisticated. The architect didn't just want the water to arrive at the villa. He wanted it to arrive with enough pressure to distribute throughout the entire structure, without needing additional pumping. Enter the Castellum Divisorum, the water tower. This was essentially a tall stone or lead tank positioned strategically high in or near the villa, where incoming aqueduct water would collect and gather. The beauty of this system is that the water tower essentially replaced the need for pumps. Gravity does the work. The higher the water tower, the greater the pressure it generates simply by existing. More water sitting higher up means more weight pushing down, which means more pressure in the pipes below. It's physics, pure and simple, but it required the architect to think in 3 dimensions. He had to position the tower where it wouldn't look ridiculous but would provide adequate elevation. He had to figure out how large it needed to be to store enough water for the villa's needs. A villa that used a lot of water, with large baths and many fountains, might have a tower that held enough for days of use. The tower had overflow pipes too, because you can't just let excess water spill over the sides onto the villa's walls. So water flowed from the aqueduct into the tower, filled it up to a certain level, and then overflow channels directed excess water to gardens, fountains, or sometimes just away from the villa entirely. From this central tower, a branching network of pipes spread throughout the villa. Lead pipes of varying diameters, each one carefully positioned and installed, often running through walls and under floors so they wouldn't be visible. The architect had to plan this routing like a city planner designing streets. Where do the pipes go? Which rooms need water first? How do you minimize bends and pressure loss? Straight lines are better than curves. Wider sections better than narrow bottlenecks. You're constantly balancing efficiency with practical constraints, like the actual layout of the villa's rooms. Maybe the most ingenious aspect of Roman villa plumbing was the heating system, because the Romans didn't just want water. They wanted hot water. Lots of it. And they solved this problem in a way that's almost mind-boggling in its elegance. Enter the hypocaust. The hypocaust was essentially a furnace system built into the foundations and walls of the villa, using forced hot air circulation to heat not just water, but entire rooms. Imagine a basement layer beneath the villa, accessible to slaves or servants, where a massive furnace burned wood or other fuel. Hot air from this furnace didn't just dissipate. It was forced or drawn through a network of hollow tiles and channels built into the structure's walls and floor. The architect had to design this whole system, coordinating with the construction team to build hollow spaces throughout the villa's infrastructure. Clay tiles called tubuli were stacked vertically in the walls, creating channels for hot air circulation. The flooring in certain rooms was raised on small stone pillars, creating a space underneath where hot air could flow. Water pipes running through these hypocaust spaces got heated as they passed through, so you'd have cold water coming from the cistern, getting gradually warmed by the heated air as it traveled through the system, arriving at the baths at just the right temperature. It was ancient radiant heating meets water heating, all in one brilliantly integrated system. The architect had to calculate things like how much heat loss you'd get, how long the water pipes should run through the heated sections, whether you needed additional heat sources at different points in the system. Too hot, and you scald people. Too cool, and you've defeated the purpose. You're constantly balancing, adjusting, thinking about flow rates and thermal conductivity and human comfort. The furnace itself required maintenance. Someone had to keep it fed with fuel, monitor the heat, clean out ash. The architect had to make sure the furnace room was accessible, that exhaust could escape safely, that the intense heat didn't damage structural elements. Some villas had multiple furnaces serving different wing, each one managed separately to provide customized heating to different sections. It was a level of sophistication and engineering complexity that wouldn't be matched again in Europe until central heating systems showed up in the 20th century. If the Hippocaust was the engineering marvel, the bathhouse was the crown jewel where everything came together in a display of absolute luxury and Roman ingenuity. The architect would design the bathhouse to be a temperature-controlled wonderland. Multiple rooms maintained at different temperatures, fed by that integrated heating and water system. First, you'd enter the apoditerium, the changing room, cool and comfortable, where you'd leave your clothes with a slave. Then the frigidarium, the cold bath, just a quick dip to invigorate yourself and close your pores, practically a shock to the system. Then the tepidarium, the warm room, where you'd sit and your body gradually adjusted to higher temperatures, sometimes lingering for a long time, talking with friends. And finally the caldarium, the hot bath, steaming, luxurious, practically a religious experience after the cold shock. The water temperature might reach around 45 degrees Celsius, hot enough to open your pores completely, but not so hot it would scald you. Then you'd emerge, and the whole sequence would begin again, sometimes cycling through multiple times. The architecture of these rooms had to support extreme temperature swings. The hot water pipes had to be protected so they didn't burst from thermal stress. The cold water pipes had to arrive from different sources, separate supply lines, because you can't mix pipes carrying water at radically different temperatures without creating pressure disasters. The architect had to position the bathing pools themselves with incredible precision. Too shallow, and they're not useful. Too deep, and you need an enormous amount of hot water to fill them. The pools were typically lined with waterproof concrete, sometimes with decorative mosaics on the walls and floor. Pipes emerged from underwater, allowing water to circulate, drain, and refill. Some pools had heated seats built into them, positioned so you'd sit in shallow water while jets of hot water hit you from the sides. It was sophisticated spa engineering disguised as ancient luxury. The water had to drain too, which brings us to another challenge. In the caldarium, hot water constantly comes in, but it has to go out, or it would overflow onto the floor and flood the room. So the architect designed drainage systems with slope and direction, channels that carried used water away from the bathing areas. The architect had to think about water quality here too. Baths got reused. Multiple people would soak in the same water throughout the day. So there were often small water jets that kept water circulating, allowing some natural mixing and cooling. Some villas had mechanisms for draining the bath completely at night, refilling it fresh the next morning. It required remarkable planning. The location of the bathing complex relative to the furnace, the heat loss through walls and floors, whether you needed insulation to keep the warmth from dissipating too quickly. Every decision affected the comfort and functionality of the space. Now let's talk about something that's a lot less glamorous but equally essential: latrines, human waste. The Romans understood something that many ancient societies didn't. You can't just let people poop wherever they want and expect a healthy civilization. So they built sophisticated waste management systems, and yes, the architect had to design those too. A noble's villa would have private latrines, multiple toilet facilities distributed throughout the complex, so people didn't have to travel halfway across the estate to answer nature's call. Some wealthy villas had 5, 10, even more latrine seats positioned in dedicated rooms. The toilets themselves were actually pretty sophisticated. A seat with a hole, sure, but beneath that was a series of channels and pipe systems designed to remove waste efficiently, carrying it away from inhabited areas while managing the inevitable stench and biological hazards. Some latrines were positioned directly above underground channels where flowing water would carry waste away. Others had settling basins where solid waste would collect while liquid waste flowed onward. The architect had to figure out gradients and slopes for the waste pipes so everything flowed downhill and didn't back up. Blockages in a latrine system are nobody's idea of fun, even for ancient Romans. There was often a public area near the latrines where people would wash their hands, fed by its own water supply. The architect had to separate this clean water system from the waste system completely. You don't want your hand-washing water near your sewage pipes. The waste eventually flowed to a cesspit outside the villa, or, if the villa was near running water, would be directed to a nearby stream or river. The Romans weren't squeamish about this. They understood that water moves things and can carry away waste if you design the system properly. Some waste was even valued. Urine was used in textile production and leather working, so occasionally chamber pots would be collected from the latrines and sold to craftspeople. Nothing went to waste, literally. The architect had to account for this too, designing collection systems and considering the logistics of workers moving through the villa to gather these materials. It wasn't romantic, but it was practical. It was engineering. Beyond the practical necessity of bathhouses and latrines, Roman architects also designed water systems for pure aesthetics and display. The ornamental fountains and water features that made a villa impressive to visitors. A wealthy Roman wanted people to know he had access to abundant water, that he could afford to have water flowing just for the sake of beauty, completely wasteful and extravagant. So architects designed elaborate fountain systems, cascading water, sculptural elements where water flowed from the mouth of a statue, perhaps a marble dolphin or a god of the sea, reflecting pools where light danced across the surface, creating an ever-shifting pattern of brightness and shadow. These weren't simple holes where water just poured out. They required precision positioning of pipes, careful calculation of flow rates, so the water arced beautifully or cascaded at just the right rhythm, sometimes splitting into multiple streams that would weave around each other before falling into a basin below. The architect had to consider how sunlight would interact with the water. A fountain positioned to catch the afternoon sun would shimmer differently than one in shade, creating dramatic effects that would change throughout the day. Pipes had to be hidden, integrated into the sculptural elements so the water appeared to emerge magically, not from some obvious pipe running along the outside of a statue. Some villas had multiple interconnected fountains where water would flow from one to another, creating a sense of movement and dynamism through the garden, water traveling downward and pooling in catches, then being siphoned or gravity-fed to the next level. It all had to be planned precisely, the entire garden choreography worked out before a single stone was laid. The water pressure, the pipe diameters, the height differences between fountains. Too much pressure and water would spray everywhere. Too little, and you'd just get a sad dribble. Getting it right required both mathematical precision and artistic sensibility. Some fountains incorporated air channels, where air could be pulled through water to create bubbling effects or different sounds. The architect might design a fountain so that water hitting stone created pleasant acoustics, almost like a musical element in the garden. It wasn't enough just to have water. It had to perform. It had to delight. It had to demonstrate the owner's wealth, taste, and access to Rome's greatest engineering minds. The daily operation of a Roman villa's plumbing system was almost as complex as its construction. Someone had to maintain it all. Wooden pipes would eventually rot and need replacement. Lead pipes, while durable, could develop leaks. Stone channels could crack. The settling basins needed to be cleaned periodically, or they'd clog with accumulated sediment. The furnace needed constant attention. Someone had to know where every pipe ran, what water was supposed to be flowing where at any given time, what to do if something broke. This was specialized knowledge. A villa that lost its water system expert could quickly face real problems. The hypocaust furnace was particularly demanding. It had to be maintained, fuel had to be sourced, ash had to be cleaned out. If the furnace went out completely, you'd lose hot water for baths and heating. In winter, that could be genuinely dangerous. Frozen pipes were a constant threat. The architect had to design the system with this in mind, positioning vulnerable sections of piping where they could be insulated or protected, sometimes running them through heated interior spaces to prevent freezing. Seasonal maintenance would have been necessary. Before winter arrived, the system might need adjustments to ensure survival through freezing months. Water quality had to be monitored. If the supply became brackish or contaminated, someone needed to know and deal with it, perhaps redirecting to a different source or cleaning the channels. The most sophisticated villas had multiple water supplies, so if one became compromised, others could still provide water for essential functions. It was a system that required constant attention, but when maintained properly, would function reliably for decades or even centuries. Slaves or specialized technicians would have handled most of this daily maintenance. But the architect, the original designer, he was responsible for making a system that could actually be maintained. If he designed something too complex or fragile, it would fail. If he designed it too simply, it wouldn't work properly. Getting that balance right separated competent architects from legendary ones. The Roman architects who designed these villa plumbing systems were operating at the absolute cutting edge of ancient engineering. They left no written instructions or blueprints that survived, so we only know how they solved these problems by examining the actual villas that still stand, by studying the remains of pipes and channels and hypocaust systems. And what we see is remarkable. The precision of the pipe work, the careful calculation of slopes and pressure, the integration of multiple systems working in harmony. These architects had to do everything through trial and error, geometric reasoning, understanding of physics that they'd picked up through observation and experiment. They didn't have calculators or computers or even reliable measuring instruments. They had mathematics, experience, and a deep understanding of how water naturally behaves. They knew that water always seeks the lowest point. They knew that moving water can carry things and can be directed. They knew that objects immersed in water produce buoyancy. They knew about siphoning and how to use it. They applied these principles to create systems that worked so well we're still studying them today, trying to understand exactly how they achieved what they did. Their legacy isn't just the villas themselves, though those are incredible. It's the principle that good engineering is about understanding the natural world deeply and working with those natural laws rather than against them. It's about precision and planning and attention to detail. It's about solving real problems in practical ways without the benefit of modern materials or convenience. It's about integration, about making sure that dozens of systems all work together seamlessly. When you stand in a Roman villa today and touch a pipe or see the remnants of a hypocaust or step into the shadows of a bathing complex, you're touching the mind of someone who figured out how to make an impossible thing work. Someone who took on a staggering challenge and solved it so well that 2,000 years later, some of it still functions. That's not luck. That's genius. That's engineering at its finest. That's the legacy of the Roman architect and the invisible masterpiece of Villa Plumbing. They remind us that true engineering is invisible when it works perfectly, that the best designs are the ones we never think about because they just function reliably day after day, year after year. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about the incredible hidden engineering of the ancient world. And let me know in the comments what ancient technology you'd most want to understand how they built.